Most homes are designed to stay warm with a furnace running. The moment that furnace stops, the building starts working against you. Here's exactly how to turn one room into a survival shelter during a winter blackout. Choosing the right room. The room selection decision is where most people go wrong, and getting it right is worth more than any amount of blankets or sleeping bags, because every subsequent layer of preparation builds on this foundation. The instinct is to use the largest room, the living room, which has the couch and the television that isn't working anyway. But size is the enemy in a heat conservation scenario. A smaller volume of air requires less energy to heat and loses heat more slowly. The ideal room meets several criteria simultaneously. It should be an interior room, one that shares walls with other conditioned spaces rather than exterior walls, because interior walls have less direct thermal contact with the outside cold. Every exterior wall is a heat loss surface, and a room with 2 interior walls and 2 exterior walls loses heat at roughly half the rate of a corner room with 3 exterior walls and a roof exposure. An interior bathroom, an interior bedroom, or a central hallway can serve this purpose. Low ceilings help. Heat rises, which is a pleasant fact when the furnace is running and the warmest air is circulating back down. It's a problem when you're trying to keep a room warm with body heat and a few candles, because the warmest air immediately stratifies upward, where it does the occupants no good. An 8-foot ceiling performs considerably better than a 12-foot one, and any room with a low ceiling or a drop ceiling already installed has a built-in insulation advantage. Access to water matters. If the room selected is near a bathroom or kitchen, occupants can continue managing basic hygiene and fill containers before water pressure drops. A room at the opposite end of the house from any water access is a less practical choice, even if it's otherwise well-positioned thermally. Avoid rooms above garages. Garage spaces are typically uninsulated and open to outdoor temperatures, making the floor above them a major heat loss surface that can be genuinely cold underfoot, and that requires significant energy to maintain at any comfortable temperature. The direction the room faces matters in a specific way. South-facing rooms with windows that receive direct winter sunlight can collect meaningful passive solar heat during daylight hours. In the northern hemisphere, the winter sun tracks low across the southern sky, and south-facing glass can deliver 300 to 700 BTUs of solar heat gain per hour during clear winter days. A room that collects that daytime heat and then has its windows covered at dusk to retain it overnight has a meaningful thermal advantage over an identical north-facing room. If the best interior room and the best solar gain room are different rooms, evaluate which factor matters more for your specific situation. In a multi-day outage with clear days, solar gain may outweigh the interior room advantage. Before we continue, I prepared a step-by-step ebook that's currently on sale, packed with practical survival systems and simple life hacks. It's designed to help you save money, stay prepared, and improve everyday safety in a simple, realistic way. You can access it instantly while the discounted price is still available. You can find the link in the description. Now let's get back to the video. Sealing the room, stopping air infiltration. Once the room is selected, the first physical task is reducing air exchange between the chosen space and the rest of the house, and between the house and the outside. Air infiltration is responsible for a substantial portion of heat loss in residential buildings, estimated by the Department of Energy at 25 to 40% of total thermal loss in average construction. In older homes with looser construction, the number is higher. The interior doors of the chosen room should seal as tightly as possible. Most interior doors have significant gaps, half an inch to 1 inch at the base, that are designed to allow airflow in a forced air HVAC system. In a survival scenario, these gaps become cold air pathways. A rolled towel, a folded blanket, or a purpose-made draft snake laid against the base of the door reduces this infiltration substantially. For doors that close into a frame with notable gaps around the sides, masking tape or painter's tape pressed along the entire doorframe perimeter adds a secondary seal. Windows in the chosen room represent the other major infiltration and conduction vulnerability. A standard double-pane window has an R value of approximately R2, compared to a well-insulated wall at R13 to R20. The window is not just losing heat through conduction, it's losing it at a rate that makes it the thermal weak point in any room. Covering windows with heavy curtains, blankets, or moving blankets dramatically reduces both conduction and convection losses. Taping the edges of the curtain or blanket to the wall around the window frame eliminates the gap through which air can circulate between the glass surface and the covering. Plastic sheeting, the type sold at hardware stores for paint drop cloths or vapor barriers, taped over the interior window surface, creates a dead air space between the plastic and the glass that functions as an additional insulating layer. This is exactly the same principle as double-pane glass, which gets its R-value improvement from the trapped air between the two panes, rather than from the glass itself. A sheet of plastic taped over the entire window can effectively add R1 to R2 of insulation for the cost of a hardware store drop cloth and a roll of tape. If the room has a heating vent or return air duct, cover it. With the HVAC system inactive, these ducts become cold air pathways connecting the room directly to the duct system and through it to the rest of the house. A piece of cardboard taped over the vent face takes 30 seconds and eliminates a meaningful draft source. Fireplace openings, if the chosen room has one, are another significant infiltration point. A fireplace damper that is closed provides some reduction, but many dampers don't seal tightly, and cold air still enters through the firebox. Plugging the firebox opening with crumpled newspaper and a piece of cardboard, or an inflatable fireplace plug if one is available, closes this pathway. Building the interior heat tent. This is the technique that gets the most eye rolls from people who haven't experienced a serious winter power outage, and the one that makes the biggest practical difference. Within the chosen room, create a smaller enclosed space, a heat tent, that is even smaller than the room itself, using whatever materials are available. The concept is straightforward. The human body produces roughly 250 to 400 BTUs of heat per hour at rest, equivalent to a small space heater running on low. In a 10 by 12 foot room with 8-foot ceilings, that body heat disperses into 960 cubic feet of air. In a heat tent, the size of a large double bed, roughly 40 square feet of floor space and 5 feet of height, the same body heat is dispersing into 200 cubic feet. The concentration of body heat in the smaller space is 5 times higher, and the temperature maintenance is proportionally better. Building materials for the interior heat tent can include a large camping tent set up indoors, which is exactly what it's designed for thermally. Tent fabrics are wind and moisture barriers that trap body heat effectively, a frame constructed from chairs and furniture with blankets draped over and weighted down to create walls, a bed with extra long blankets pulled over a frame of pillows or chairs creating a canopy, or any combination of available materials that creates an enclosed low-ceiling space. The interior heat tent approach was used historically and is still recommended by emergency management professionals. During the January 1998 ice storm that left parts of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, and eastern Ontario without power for up to 5 weeks, one of the most severe winter power outages in North American history, emergency management reports documented families maintaining survivable temperatures in small interior spaces that would have been impossible to maintain across an entire house. The tent within a room works particularly well for sleeping, the period of lowest body activity and therefore greatest vulnerability to cold. Setting up the heat tent specifically as a sleeping arrangement with all occupants inside it creates a combined body heat output that can maintain the interior of the tent at meaningful above ambient temperatures, even in a very cold room. One practical dimension worth addressing. Children and elderly household members lose heat more quickly than healthy adults and benefit most from the concentrated body heat of the group sleeping arrangement. Children lose heat through their heads more rapidly than adults due to proportionally larger head surface area. A wool hat worn to sleep is not excessive. It is simply correct thermal management. Elderly individuals whose thermoregulatory systems are less responsive may not shiver effectively or recognize early hypothermia signs, which makes monitoring the temperature in the shelter space with a thermometer more important, not less, when elderly family members are present. Insulation layering, floors, walls, and ceiling. The floor is the most underestimated heat loss surface in a survival shelter setup, and it's one that standard preparedness advice consistently neglects. Cold floors conduct heat away from bare feet rapidly. The floor surface may be significantly colder than the air in the room, particularly over an uninsulated crawl space, basement, or garage. Standing or sitting on a cold floor extracts body heat directly through conduction. The solution is insulating the floor within the chosen space. Area rugs over hard flooring help considerably. Layering cardboard, which is a surprisingly effective insulator, under additional fabric layers creates a meaningful barrier. Moving blankets, foam sleeping pads, yoga mats, or any similar material on the floor of the heat tent eliminates the direct conductive contact between occupants and cold subflooring. This is not optional. Cold floor exposure is consistently underestimated as a source of heat loss and physical discomfort. Wall insulation within the room can be improvised by hanging additional blankets or moving blankets against exterior walls specifically, creating a dead air space between the blanket and the wall surface that reduces conductive and convective heat loss through the wall. The same principle that makes insulation work, trapped still air is a poor conductor of heat, is replicated in a rough form with any fabric hung with a small air gap against a cold surface. Ceiling insulation is the most difficult to address without permanent modification. The simplest approach is to lower the effective ceiling height of the occupied space by creating the interior heat tent with a low roof, 5 feet or lower, which means that the warmest air being produced by occupants and any heat source is concentrated in a small space rather than rising to the actual ceiling of the room, where it provides no benefit to the people below. A thermal mass consideration is worth raising here. Dense materials, stone countertops, tile floors, full water containers, cast iron cookware absorb heat slowly and release it slowly. If any indoor safe heat source is being used to warm the space during the day, these materials will absorb heat and continue radiating it after the heat source is turned off or exhausted. Positioning water-filled containers, cast iron, or other dense materials near any heat source during heating periods and then into the sleeping space creates a rudimentary thermal battery effect that extends the warmth from each heating session. Sleeping arrangements for maximum heat retention. Sleeping is when the body is least active, when metabolic heat production is at its lowest, and when heat loss is most critical, making sleeping arrangements the most important single component of surviving a cold indoor environment. People have died of hypothermia indoors during winter power outages, specifically during sleep, when the gradual temperature drop went unnoticed until it had already become a medical emergency. The key principles are simple: concentrate body heat, minimize exposure surface, and insulate from below as much as from above. Multiple people in the same sleeping space share body heat in a way that single occupant sleeping does not. A family of 4 sleeping together in an insulated tent within a room maintains a significantly higher interior temperature than the same 4 people sleeping in separate rooms. This is not a comfortable observation for families accustomed to privacy, but it is accurate. A single person's body heat in a cold indoor environment is a marginal resource. 4 people's body heat is a meaningful heating system. Sleeping bags perform dramatically better than open blankets for a specific physical reason. They enclose the body in a small volume of air that the body heats and retains, rather than allowing warm air to circulate away from the body's surface. A sleeping bag with a temperature rating appropriate to the expected indoor temperature is the single most valuable piece of equipment for winter indoor survival. The temperature rating on a sleeping bag represents the minimum temperature at which a person in that bag can survive, not necessarily sleep comfortably. So a bag rated to 15 degrees Fahrenheit provides survival-level warmth at that temperature and comfortable sleep at considerably higher temperatures. Wool and synthetic insulation in blankets and sleeping bags retains insulating value when compressed or damp, a critical distinction from cotton, which loses most of its insulating capacity when wet and compresses to near-zero insulation under body weight. This is why experienced cold weather campers avoid cotton against the body and why wool blankets have maintained a performance advantage over cotton quilts for cold environment sleeping. Sleeping off the floor, on a mattress, a cot, a couch, or any raised sleeping surface eliminates the conductive heat loss that occurs between the body and cold subflooring. If sleeping directly on the floor is unavoidable, layering foam sleeping pads or cardboard beneath the sleeping bag creates an insulating barrier that makes the floor viable. Covering the head during sleep provides a disproportionate benefit relative to the effort involved. The head and neck lose heat more rapidly than most other body surfaces, and a simple wool hat worn to sleep reduces overall heat loss measurably. Military cold weather doctrine addresses this explicitly. The phrase, "If your feet are cold, cover your head," reflects the physiological reality that core temperature maintenance is what drives peripheral circulation, and head coverage reduces the thermal load on the body's heat generation system. Safe heat sources for indoor use. Heat sources in an indoor emergency are a topic that requires precision because the most obvious and available options, charcoal grills, propane camp stoves, gasoline generators, are carbon monoxide hazards that have killed people in the exact emergency scenario this video is preparing for. Carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless, and its symptoms, headache, drowsiness, confusion, are easily attributed to the cold, the stress, or simply being tired, which means poisoning can progress unrecognized until incapacitation. After Hurricane Sandy in October 2012, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention documented 11 deaths from carbon monoxide poisoning in the immediate aftermath of the storm, all from indoor use of generators, camp stoves, or charcoal equipment. After Winter Storm Uri in Texas in February 2021, the Texas Department of State Health Services documented at least 26 deaths attributable to carbon monoxide poisoning, also from indoor combustion equipment. These are not rare accidents. They are a predictable and consistent pattern that repeats with every major winter power event. Safe indoor heat sources that do not produce carbon monoxide include propane heaters specifically rated and designed for indoor use with sealed combustion chambers. The Mr. Heater Buddy and similar designs are the most widely sold. Alcohol-based heaters, Esbit fuel tablets, and similar alcohol gel products produce minimal combustion byproducts. And beeswax or paraffin candles, which produce carbon dioxide and water vapor rather than carbon monoxide when burning cleanly. The indoor safe propane heaters deserve a specific note on safety. They use catalytic combustion rather than open flame, which produces less incomplete combustion and lower carbon monoxide output. They also include oxygen depletion sensors that automatically shut off the heater when oxygen concentration drops below a safe threshold. Despite these features, they should still be used with a window cracked slightly for ventilation and a working carbon monoxide detector in the room. A carbon monoxide detector is non-negotiable in any indoor emergency heating setup. Battery-operated CO detectors are available at hardware stores for under $30 and should be standard equipment in any household's emergency preparedness kit. Positioning the detector at sleeping height level, not mounted high on the wall, provides the most relevant monitoring for the occupied sleeping space. Candles deserve more credit than they usually receive in this context. A single paraffin or beeswax candle produces approximately 80 BTUs of heat per hour. Not a major heat source on its own, but meaningful in a well-insulated heat tent. 3 candles in a small enclosed tent space produce 240 BTUs per hour, equivalent to roughly 60% of a resting adult's body heat output. Combined with body heat from multiple occupants, candles in an enclosed space make a measurable difference in overnight temperature maintenance. The fire safety considerations, stable placement in appropriate holders, nothing flammable within reach of the flame, ability to extinguish quickly if needed, are real and require attention, but they don't make candles inappropriate for this use. Managing moisture and ventilation. A survival shelter setup that is well sealed for heat conservation creates a secondary problem: moisture accumulation. Breathing, sweating, and any cooking or boiling of water inside the space produces water vapor that accumulates in a sealed environment. In cold conditions, this moisture can condense on cold surfaces, windows, walls, the interior of the heat tent, creating damp conditions that accelerate both structural damage and the occupant's heat loss. Damp insulation loses effectiveness. Damp clothing and bedding significantly accelerates heat loss from the body. Managing this requires balancing seal tightness with minimal ventilation. A slight crack in a window, half an inch, or a brief daily period of opening the room door for a few minutes allows moisture to escape without significantly depressing room temperature, particularly if done during the warmest part of the day and minimized in duration. Body moisture management extends to clothing. Wearing moisture-wicking base layers against the skin, synthetic or wool fabrics that move perspiration away from the skin surface, prevents the damp skin cold cycle that represents the primary physical mechanism of hypothermia onset. Cotton-based layers that absorb and hold moisture against the skin, particularly during any physical exertion, are genuinely dangerous in cold survival conditions. The outdoor recreation community has codified this knowledge in the phrase, "cotton kills," hyperbolic enough to be memorable, accurate enough to be worth remembering. Wool's unique advantage: it remains insulating even when wet, was recognized long before the fiber science was understood. Scandinavian fishermen, Scottish shepherds, and alpine herders all converged on wool as the cold and wet insulation of choice for the same empirical reason. It worked when conditions made everything else fail. Wet gear management deserves specific attention in a multi-day outage. Boots, outer layers, and any clothing that has gotten wet through outdoor activity or condensation should be removed before entering the sleeping space and either hung to dry in the warmer interior air or kept away from the sleeping zone. Bringing wet gear into the sleeping space introduces moisture that reduces the effective insulation of the entire setup. This discipline, leaving wet outer layers at the door of the sleeping space, is standard in military and expedition cold weather doctrine for exactly this reason. Food, water, and maintaining function. A survival shelter during a winter blackout is not just a warmth problem. It's a logistics and resource management problem. Food and water access, maintained at adequate levels, directly affect the body's ability to generate the heat that all of the insulation strategies above are designed to conserve. Caloric intake is directly linked to metabolic heat production. The body in a cold environment increases its metabolic rate to generate more heat, a process called thermogenesis. And this increased metabolic activity requires fuel. Eating calorie-dense food consistently throughout a cold exposure period maintains the body's heat generation at a level that makes the insulation around it effective. A person who hasn't eaten in 24 hours generates significantly less metabolic heat than a well-fed one, regardless of how many sleeping bags they're wrapped in. High-fat foods, nuts, peanut butter, cheese, chocolate, are particularly effective as cold weather fuel because fat has more than twice the caloric density of carbohydrate or protein. Water intake is equally important. Dehydration in cold conditions impairs the body's thermostatic function and accelerates heat loss, partly because blood volume drops and peripheral circulation, which is the body's mechanism for distributing heat, becomes less effective. The body's thirst sensation is blunted by cold. Cold suppresses thirst response, which means deliberate, regular fluid intake is necessary even when not feeling thirsty. Warm fluids serve a double purpose. They directly warm the core, and they support hydration simultaneously. A thermos of hot water, hot broth, or hot tea maintained from any available heat source and consumed regularly is one of the most effective single comfort and physiological support measures available. Physical activity during a winter outage should be calibrated carefully. Light activity, enough to elevate metabolism and generate warmth, is beneficial and can meaningfully raise the body's heat output without requiring much space or equipment. Excessive physical activity that causes heavy sweating should be avoided because the resulting moisture in base layers and sleeping gear depresses insulation performance in ways that outlast the warmth benefit of the exertion itself. The balance point is gentle warming activity that doesn't produce a sweat response, the kind of controlled movement that generates heat without the moisture that undermines it. As survival instructor and author Les Stroud noted about cold environment priorities, the mistake people make is thinking cold is the problem. Cold is the condition. Dehydration, poor nutrition, and exhaustion are what make the cold lethal. Building the supply kit for the shelter room, the preparation for this scenario doesn't happen when the power goes out. It happens beforehand. And the gap between a household that has assembled basic supplies and one that hasn't is the gap between manageable discomfort and a genuine emergency in a sustained winter outage. The supply kit for the shelter room includes several battery-powered LED lanterns with fresh or rechargeable batteries, a stock of candles with appropriate holders, a hand crank or battery-powered emergency radio for receiving NOAA weather and emergency broadcasts, a carbon monoxide detector, a battery-powered thermometer to monitor room temperature. Knowing the temperature is more useful than guessing, particularly in relation to the safe sleep temperature threshold. Hypothermia risk increases as room temperature drops below 50 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods. A first aid kit with particular attention to cold injury treatment guidance, and sufficient water stored in the room or accessible adjacent to it. Stored food that requires no cooking, crackers, nuts, peanut butter, canned goods, dried fruit, energy bars, means that caloric intake does not depend on a functioning heat source. The ability to eat without needing a stove eliminates one dependency and one potential carbon monoxide hazard simultaneously. A backup power bank capable of charging phones and other devices is worth including, along with a list of emergency contacts and local emergency services numbers written on paper, not stored only in a phone that may run out of power. The discipline of keeping physical records of critical information is one of the things that modern device dependency has quietly eroded, and a power outage lasting more than a day makes the absence of paper records genuinely inconvenient. Entertainment for extended confinement is not a luxury consideration. It is a morale and psychological stability consideration that affects decision-making and cooperation within the household. Physical books, playing cards, board games, and puzzle materials that require no electricity provide the kind of extended engagement that prevents the specific kind of cabin fever tension that develops when families are confined together in a small space under stress. Cold environment survival accounts from both historical and modern contexts consistently note that morale maintenance was among the most practically important factors in household survival outcomes. Having these materials already in or near the designated shelter room, rather than scattered through the house, eliminates the need to move through cold, dark spaces, collecting them after the power has been out long enough to matter. The pre-positioned shelter room is a decision made in advance, not improvised under pressure. And that preparation gap is where most winter power outage stories diverge between the ones that end fine and the ones that don't. Protecting pipes and knowing when to leave. Two additional considerations round out the practical picture for a winter blackout shelter setup. The first is pipe protection. Water pipes in exterior walls or unheated spaces begin to freeze when wall cavity temperatures drop below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, which can happen within 24 hours of a heating failure in very cold weather. Burst pipes cause water damage that compounds the original emergency and can go undetected in unoccupied parts of the house. Leaving cabinet doors under sinks and exterior walls open allows warmer interior air to circulate around pipe runs. Dripping faucets on exterior wall-adjacent lines reduces static water that can freeze solid. Shutting off the water supply at the main valve and draining the system is the most complete solution if the outage looks likely to be extended. The second consideration is the recognition threshold for when to leave rather than shelter in place. A well-managed single-room shelter can maintain survivable temperatures considerably below outdoor conditions, but there are limits. If the indoor temperature drops below 40 degrees Fahrenheit for extended periods, if vulnerable household members, infants, elderly individuals, or those with compromised health are showing signs of cold stress, or if the outage extends beyond resource capacity, relocating to a warming center, a neighbor's working heat source, or a hotel is the correct call. Emergency warming centers are operated by municipalities during extended winter power events. Schools, community centers, and public buildings with backup generators. NOAA weather radio and local emergency broadcasts announce their locations, which is exactly why the battery-powered radio in the supply kit isn't optional. If this video gave you a practical blueprint for one of the most realistic emergency scenarios most households will ever face, hit the like button. It helps more people find this content when they need it. And subscribe to the channel for more no-nonsense preparedness content that's actually built around what works.